Welcome back to the Modern Military History Podcast. I am Andrew, your host and presenter. We are back again with Mr. Bud Gibson. He is an expert and historian on Special Forces history, and we are discussing today part 2 of our 2-part series of how MACV-SOG and modern Delta Force are intrinsically tied, and how a lot of guys who served with and in MACV-SOG directly gave rise to the Tier 1 tip of the spear force that we now have guarding this country and guarding democracy. First, SFOD, Delta, also known as the Combat Application Group, CAG, and other names that we discussed in Part 1. If you haven't watched Part 1, the link's going to be here. You'll be able to go see it. But we're diving right back in. We have discussed a couple of key figures and terms. We've discussed the origins of SOG, we've discussed what Delta Force is, and we have talked about 2 foundational members that we had in number 1. And again, please watch number 1. This is not going to make sense if you haven't watched the first episode, but we discussed in episode number 1 Charlie Beckwith. And Beckwith was just, as we named, the father of Delta Force. It was his vision. He put it together. And his right-hand man, and in many ways co-conspirator, Dick Meadows, was right there with him as a civilian attaché, helping him recruit and build out Delta Force and bringing his own incredible knowledge base to the foundation of the unit. Now we're back today with Bud, and we're going to be discussing the other 3 men on our top 5 list of foundational members of the Delta Force foundational family. Bud, how's it going?
I'm doing well. Glad to be back, and can't wait to get started.
Copy that. Let's dive right in. We're going to start with number 3 on our list, and this is a man that I'm excited to hear more about. Master Sergeant William Country Grimes. Tell us about Mr. Country Grimes.
Well, Mr. Country Grimes is, in my opinion, he would probably be, at least so far for me, he's been one of the more difficult men to find information on. Sadly, we lost him as well in 93. He was born in 1938. He died in February of 22nd of 1993. But he really was a quiet professional. Unless you were close friends with him or were in action with him, you don't know much about him. I've been lucky enough to be with some men who served with him in SOG, and lucky enough to meet or talk to 2 or 3 men who knew him at the unit. But even with that, he was an awful quiet operator. So he was very from all accounts, he was just like the other guys. I mean, it's a common thread with these guys. He was a hard charger. He was in it to fight communism and defend America at any cost, including giving up his own life. He joined in 1958. I'm not even sure. Like I said, it's so rare on info. I don't even know where he was born. I don't even know where he joined the military, but he joined in 1958, and he finally retired from active service in 1985.
Wow.
As it says, not much is known before his SF career, but he did serve a Vietnam tour with an airborne unit, and I'm still trying to figure out which one. Could have been 173rd, could have been 82nd, 101st, so I'm still trying to locate that. But a common thread among the SOG gentlemen I've spoken with before and after, a lot of gentlemen came from the 82nd Airborne. So I wouldn't put it past it. He might have been an 82nd Airborne enlistee before he went SF. But as far as his most most important assignments, you would say in history, or I guess he would say would be when he served with, of course, MACV-SOG, and he was originally, from what I've gathered so far, he was a Hatchet Force platoon leader and was a heck of a guy. Coming back yet again, you had to be good with indigenous people. You had to be a very good thinker. It shows. He also, after that, it shows how well he was respected and how, as the SOG men say, good in the woods.
So I just want to define for the folks who are listening that Hatchet Force, and correct me, Bud, if I'm wrong, the Hatchet Force was a part of MACV-SOG that was very similar, but quite different from recon teams. And the recon team world was not just small unit, but like tiny unit operations. It's a team of, I think 10 guys is almost unheard of. That would be like the maximum. We're talking more like 6, 7, or 8 guys at the most, mostly indigenous, a couple Americans working closely together on a recon team. That's what Dick Thompson was doing. That's what Tilt was doing. That's what the Wild Carrot was doing. And guys like Mr. Hasey, who was on the show, and he was flying support for folks like that. The Hatchet Force was different from the recon team world because the Hatchet Force was like a platoon or a company of indigenous personnel. We're talking 40, 50, 60, 100 guys. And the Hatchet Force had a dedicated cadre of SOG men who were working, and this is still a small unit, individual unit by military standards. But these Hatchet Force guys were developing these squadrons of indigenous troops on more like the company level. Am I here? Is that correct? Am I getting that right, Bud?
Absolutely.
Copy that.
Absolutely. What a lot of people don't realize, sometimes it was the luck of the draw, sometimes it wasn't. Some of the guys initially started off in the Hatchet Forces and would show that they were, or they would just ask and get transferred to the recon element. And speaking to team size, absolutely 10 to 12, that's as big as it got. My personal hero in SOG is Joe Walker, and he ran RT California, and he was in Project Delta also. He and R2 New York leader Ed Walkoff, who's written the SOG tips and tactics book that everyone needs to get. They ran the largest teams I've ever heard of outside of Hatchet Force configurations. And you're right, Hatchet Forces would get anywhere from 30, 40, 50. And if you get to what they'd call a SLAM operation, search, locate, annihilate, monitor, it would get up to 70, 80. And then with Tailwind, that was the largest, and I believe it was 125, 50?
Yeah, it was definitely over 100 guys. And I'm just thinking that what Mr. Country Grimes was doing with Hatchet Force directly translated to work that would, be instrumental as a founding member of Delta Force. What do you think about that assumption?
Absolutely. The Hatchet Forces guys don't get a lot of the publicity that they're due. Like I said, a lot of them were either coming in, would be sent there before recon, and then some guys would go from recon to Hatchet Forces. So a lot of them, a lot of guys, a lot of Hatchet Forces were led by really, really good 1-0s that just weren't feeling the recon teams and stuff like that. So he was very, like Delta was set up and with the squadron and stuff like that. He was the head of his platoon or company of Hatchet Forces, and he ran and controlled everything on the ground that was operating.
Do you have a story or two in regards to Master Sergeant Grimes and his time with the Hatchet Forces, his time with MACV-SOG, that might help people kind of understand his service in Vietnam before he transitioned over to Delta?
Well, yet again, sadly, a lot of his he didn't talk much or tell stories, but we're lucky enough that John Plaster was friends with him. He was a covey rider, and Mr. Country Grimes actually transitioned over to a covey rider, which shows you he was a very good in the woods, because you didn't get selected to ride covey unless you were a good in the woods. So Country was very well known to get teams out of harm's way, whether an immediate extract or to lead them to safety away from the onslaught of the NVA coming after them. So he was very, very good as a covey rider. And what I've gathered from speaking to men is one thing that set him apart, and you'll hear John Plaster speak of this, and sadly the man who likes to remain anonymous is the man who recruited both of these men as a covey rider. But he taught them, you've got to stay calm for the men on the ground, because the moment you start freaking out, they're dead. So Country was known to have the most calming covey voice speaking to you. He was always he was always keeping you calm and ensuring you were going to get out of there alive. One time he and a platoon, this is actually him on the ground, they were inserting, and unknown to the pilot, they had uncovered a cache of a huge amounts of rockets, and so either somebody set off a what was it? Somebody ended up setting off a charge too early, because they were going to mark it, because it was literally 2,000 pounds of rice, 50,000 pounds of rice, and I forgot how many rounds of ammunition. And he ended up finding that, and they blew it up. And that was one of the largest cash and food supply ever destroyed in SOG history.
If I remember, I may have read about this in John in Plaster's book. Wasn't he? Was this the cache they found where they were trying to figure out how to destroy all this stuff? Like, they couldn't figure out. They're dumping rice out there, pissing on it. They're trying to burn it. They don't know what to do. And then they ended up just napalming the entire cache. Was this in Laos?
That was.
So they inserted into Laos, and that was Country Grimes' team. Okay.
That was Country.
My copy of Plaster's book is so dog-eared, because every time I'd find a cool story, I would mark it, and it's every page. But one of the big ones is that mission. So Country Grimes led in and it was a hatchet force, and they came across this massive cache, and they couldn't destroy it. There was so much shit there.
He actually, people don't realize this, but he, along with one of my private contacts, he was actually worked 3 or 4 days straight with Eugene McCarley as a covey rider, getting his bacon out of the fryer, so to speak, in the Hatchet Force team for Tailwind.
Wow.
So he was on some very important stuff, and that's just the two that I was able to find.
Copy that.
So it stands to reason he was doing a lot of work. Like I said, the Hatchet Force stuff wasn't always written down and all that. So
yeah,
but he was.
So when did he get involved with Delta? How did that happen? Do you know anything about how he got recruited for Delta?
He, as far as I've been able to find out, he again hooked up with Charlie Beckwith. I don't know if it was at Bragg after SOG or what happened. No. You know what it was?
Was it Nakhon Phanom? Did he operate covey out of Thailand and met Beckwith?
I mixed it up. He actually was. I was mixing up my people. He was actually handpicked by Beckwith to be the first Delta Force Sergeant Major.
Oh,
And
whoa.
there's a little bit of contention amongst this, which we'll come into later, but it's between him and Walt Shumate on who was the oldest man to complete OTC.
Oh, really?
And right now it's attributed to Country. He was 45 years old completing the OTC.
So describe for the people what OTC is.
OTC would be let's see. Well, that would be another one. It's Delta Force's green team, which it still doesn't help. It is basically a souped up version of the Q course, but you don't get teammate help, you don't get cadre feedback, so that messes with people's mind, knowing if they're not doing good, if they're not, and a lot of it is, at least in these days, I've been able to gather the focus was on land navigation and land navigation, and I went blank, but there was a pivotal thing on land navigation due to their mission and needing to be able to, because you've heard the stories of lieutenants and even sergeants getting in the bush in Vietnam and not even being able to read a map.
Yeah. So. I wanted to define OTC for people because that's essentially selection.
It exactly is selection, and it is actually I'll get blasted for this, but as far as you could say, Bud's is the hardest school or whatever, but OTC is the most difficult from what I've gathered mentally, and it's definitely hard physically because they are rucking you to death, but it is so much harder mentally because you're good enough to be there, but no one there is telling you how well you're doing or what the standing is.
Man, there's an entire Bud's basic underwater demolition SEAL. They let a camera crew follow one of their classes, and that's all on YouTube. You can watch all of Bud's on YouTube.com. Okay, we don't know shit about OTC, and I really think that's interesting, and I think it's funny that there's us two yahoos here who are just kind of like trying to figure it out. We're trying to we're putting the pieces together, and I really do hope that that this podcast series we're doing here will be viewed by guys who are affiliated with the unit, so that they can know their history and maybe they'll give us some feedback. As a private civilian and as a history guy, I just want to contribute and preserve this history. So hopefully guys from the unit might be able to chime in.
We'll get Mike Vining on one day. He's a sweet guy.
Cool.
And he was telling me about specifically, people need to realize this about OTC. It's not like the Q course. Like I said, it's not like the Ranger School or Buds or anything like that. You can literally have the highest number you can think of, 200 people or whatever. There could be nobody past that class. I mean, there's been, as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, Mike Vining was in a class of maybe 30 or something, and 2 people passed himself and one other. So this is real deal stuff to be able to get into the unit.
If I remember, there's one book I've read on OTC, and I don't want to get too far into the woods. This isn't, just to define, this podcast series is not like the Delta Force podcast series where we talk about everything what we're trying to do here is just like MACV-SOG and the guys who learned amazing things, transitioned over, just totally gave rise to Delta. You could not have had Delta without these foundational members, many of which the big 5 we're talking about today just came from MACV-SOG. So I want to keep us on target, but I also just want to say what I remember about reading about OTC. It's heavy land nav, heavy problem solving, heavy self-sufficiency, and rigorous PT testing. and guys essentially get an invitation. You get an
Mhm.
invitation, you show up to OTC, and all you
Well,
know
first
is
you're
a
briefed. You're briefed like SOG. You've got to even
yeah.
sign an NDA,
Oh,
even if
really?
you don't go. Yeah, you just like with SOG. Once you're brought in and they tell you,
Yeah.
and if you got to sign, even if you don't go. So
Jeez.
it's very much like SOG on that aspect.
The correlations are great in many, and that's why we're doing what we're doing today. What do you know about Mr. Grimes's time in the unit? If you can talk at all about his time as a foundational member, as a master sergeant in the unit.
Yes, he was involved with uh mostly there at the beginning as a sergeant major. At that point in time, I think the unit was only allowed one sergeant major, which really kind of messed things up. So there for a while, he was in operations and held that position for a while. Not to say he did not go out with squadrons on combat. Let me find where I put country. Second person in Delta, involved in ops. Yeah, see, it does not say he was specifically involved with a squadron, and I'll need to look, but I've got every name of the operators who were on Eagle Claw,
Yeah.
and I want to say he was on Eagle Claw with helping out Bucky Burris and Colonel Beckwith.
Well, we can always get back to that. We don't want to put out the wrong information,
Oh
but it
no.
would make perfect sense if he was one of the foundational members. And I mean, geez, if Beckwith went along, then it makes sense. But I don't want to put out the wrong information, so let's just kind of carry on here to number 4. Now, you mentioned his name when it came to the oldest individual to pass OTC. Now we know what OTC is. We're going to talk today about somebody I can't wait to talk about. And I read about him. He is one of the people that I knew about involved in founding Delta Force, who was involved with MACV-SOG, and it just really got me interested in doing this project in the first place. So number 4, Walter Lee Shumate, Sergeant Major Walter Shumate. What do you know about Mr. Walt Shumate? A legend, an absolute legend. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about him.
First off, let me say I've got a lot of people I say are my favorites and all that, and it's always hard to completely say someone's your absolute favorite, but Mr. Walt is up there as one of my favorite people.
Mhm.
He is old school as they come. He was around SF long before SOG was getting going, and he as we'll see, he was a character and was a great guy.
Wow.
He's a native Virginian. He he was born September 20th, 1934, and he also spent like with Dick Thompson's, and I'm Dick Meadows. Gosh, there's the Thompson again.
I know.
He enlisted in 1952 as an airborne infantryman, and he was assigned to the 187th Regimental Combat Team, the Rakkasans, also, and he served in Korea, which, if I'm not mistaken, that was his first CIB that he got in Korea. Later on, he went on to Germany, which is where, weirdly enough, this is kind of where Mad Dog Shriver and some SOG guys were. He was serving with the 11th Airborne Division, and they were stationed in Germany for a while, and they were starting up Pathfinders, and it wasn't the LLRP, it was still just the initial LRP groups, and he was starting that, and all of a sudden he ends up with a Pathfinder platoon, but gets tasked, and I don't know who tasked him or if it was just luck of the draw, but he served as an airborne and jump master school instructor, and everyone says that's where he fell in love with his love of not only just skydiving, jumping, but especially Halo. He loved Halo. That was his bread and butter. He after that he ended up like I said again, ended up with the 82nd for a while as a squad leader in the 504th. In January of 62 though, that's when he finally went with the Special Forces and completed the qualification course as a weapons sergeant. So there again, he's already getting into it and getting into the goods, the weapons side, and was assigned to A323 C Company of the 1st Special Forces Group at Okinawa. And a lot of SOG guys and a lot of other even non-SOG guys that were at Okinawa ended up in Delta. Okinawa was a very they were doing Halo, all kinds of cool stuff out there.
Quick Okinawa digression just for me. I think it's called Camp Schwab, Okinawa. It's a Marine Corps installation, and I have a good friend of mine who's a retired major of the Marine Corps, and he is awesome. I absolutely love this dude. He's a good friend of mine, and I'm just so happy to know him. We're having, a good time. We're at the bar, and and he's telling me stories because that's all, it gets to the point in the night when we're hanging out where I'm like, tell me Marine Corps stories. And he's telling me about Camp Schwab, Okinawa. And I know this doesn't have shit to do with MACV-SOG. This doesn't have shit to do with Delta. This is just a good story. Deal with it. It's what my buddy's like, Camp Schwab was just, and this speaks to the massive military presence that we had and still have on Okinawa. This was in the 90s. He said that Camp Schwab was referred to as Land of the Hand because there were no women around.
Wow.
So they called it Land of the Hand, and nobody enjoyed it. But I know during the Vietnam era, the counterinsurgency office, the CISO office, was making clandestine equipment for SOG out of Okinawa. The Marine Corps have had a massive presence there, and the Special Forces have had a massive presence there, especially during Vietnam. So it makes perfect sense that there was a lot of history tied in with our military presence on Okinawa. But I had to share my story about the Land of the Hand because I think that's just funny as hell.
That's funny because two things. One, I'm close with a Force Recon guy who would train at Okinawa, and he said the exact same thing. He said, if you were looking for fun, you ain't having any. It was strictly training time to pass the time. And speaking of CSIO, Mr. Walt Shumate, I don't know if he ran into him before Mr. Ben Baker there at that time or another time, but he would go visit Mr. Ben a lot. And Mr. Walt loved SOG knives, and he was always trying to get Ben to make extra SOG knives for him. And he's like, he went down there one time. He's like, hey, can you get me 2 or 3 more? He's like, haven't I made you 20-something in the past month or so? He's like, I don't think so. And he's like, I don't know what you're doing with these, Shumate, but you better be careful. I don't know if he was trading and getting some goods or what have you, but he was all over those SOG knives at CISO with SOG's Q, Ben Baker.
Copy that. And this brings us back here to Walt Shumate from our digression. So talk to me about Walt Shumate's time with MACV-SOG in country. What kind of stuff was he getting up to? Share a couple stories with us that help us understand the legendary Walter Shumate a little bit more.
One modern day interesting tidbit, well, it goes into modern day tidbit, is Mr. Walt was a huge diver, loved diving and scuba diving and the whole thing. He completed the dive course taught by the Navy UDT. So he was actually UDT qualified as well. and he
Whoa.
ended up teaching combat diving and maritime operations and standing up the school at Key West. And the dive tower now is named after Walt Shumate. And I know a few SOG men who actually were with him after SOG doing some dive work and stuff like that. And it's very interesting that thank goodness they honored him, because he did a lot to stand up the dive community down there. But digression done, but we'll get to SOG here. Yeah, Mr. Walt is one of those just awesome guy. Where did I do? I misplaced that. Oh, that was for Dick Meadows. Sorry. Mr. Walt originally started out as a Hatchet Force platoon leader, and I know I'm close with two men, and there's a very famous photo of them in the woods, and I've gotten a few that I'll share that have probably never been seen of Mr. Walt. But
Wow.
he was on the ground with the Hatchet Force, and it happened to have two recon men on the Hatchet Force with them, and they were both 1-0s of their team, and they immediately gave up all command operability to Walt Shumate. As a matter of fact, this guy was a 1-0 of two teams by himself, and
Whoa.
gave up operational capacity to Walt while in the field. He was he was in Project Delta also. That's another one. He again, the Halo. 46. I forgot he was with them. Everybody out there, if y'all have not heard of the 46 Special Forces Group in Thailand, I recommend you start looking them up. A lot of SOG guys and a lot of secret squirrel stuff going on over there. But Mr. Walt was with them and ran underwater ops for them. But shortly after that, he was. This was after his first SOG tour. After he set up the scuba school in Key West, he returned again in 1971, and he went straight back to MACV-SOG at Khartoum at CCC. They had already changed FOB2 and all that. They're CCC now, and he immediately went back to leading a Hatchet Force platoon. And if I'm not mistaken, in the later part of the years in 71, 72, he ended up coming across one of the larger bin trams, which is let's call rest stop area on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And they came across live chickens, pigs. I mean, it was clearly a food and caretaking facility. And they completely wiped it out. I mean, didn't kill all the animals, let the animals loose and let them go on and all that. And as a matter of fact, there's some really good photos of Mr. Walt riding a pig around and all that. That's absolutely hilarious. I'll have to get that one to you so you can
that one might just be the thumbnail of this episode. If you're okay with, but that would be great. Dude,
I've got a Hatchet Force operation of when they found some kind of little furry animals, and Mr. Walt's got his big wax tip mustache, and it's funny seeing this awesome, powerful man holding these two little furry babies. I don't even know what kind of animals they are, but he's got them on their hands, and he's looking at them just laughing and all that. He, from all accounts, he was well respected. He treated even the new guys well. Even at Delta, he treated new guys well. It seems like, from what I've gathered, he was a teacher through and through. Not to say he wouldn't get down and dirty shooting bullets, but he was a teacher, as you can see from his diving. And
I as I said, I don't, you are here teaching us today. So appreciative of that. The only piece that I can add to this is that I read about how Mr. Shumate was in charge of OTC and selection for a lot of the early foundational members of Delta Force. and he is famous for being super serious about soldiering, but a relatively relaxed and somewhat eccentric guy. People would come up to him, rigid, salute, report to the sergeant major, and he would just be like, "Yo, calm down. What do you, take it easy here. Shirt's unbuttoned."
in
He's just like,
in Hawaiian shorts and
yes,
Hawaiian shirts and sandals.
exactly. There's a famous passage of a book, one of the few books I've had on this subject, where Walt Shumate is in a Hawaiian shirt, and he has all these like 30, 40 guys getting ready to go through OTC, and he has a cameraman come up, and one of the guys like, "Hey, Walt, what's this all about?" And Walt's like, "Yeah, you guys, there ain't going to be many of you left, so we're taking a picture now." And you know what? And he didn't put up with a lot of buck from anybody, but he seemed like a relatively unique individual, to say the least. And I also just want to say that another thing I know that forever froze Walt Shumate as an incredible individual in my mind is that his mustache is framed like a picture. His actual mustache is framed and hung on the dining area in the Delta Force area to this day.
I've got a very good, wow, I can't find my Eldon Bargewell paper. There's a very funny issue that actually revolves around Delta, because it there at the end it was Delta. He when he was getting sick and knew he was starting chemo, he knew he was about to start losing hair and all of that. So the guys got a professional barber to come and get it perfectly off.
How do you even do that? Because it's all,
no
you know
idea.
what? I've thought about this because I was reading up on this, Bud, and this is I think you would have to like get like a piece, like put tape over it and then kind of cut it off so it stays together, and then you'd mount it, and I don't know how you would do it. And I want to see this thing so bad, but of course I'm not allowed. I'm not allowed in there. But dude, I've been thinking, I'm like, how the hell do you frame a mustache? And again, maybe somebody out there who's framed mustaches or toupees or something can come in and tell us. But again, what a personality that, he's looking at chemo and he's like, well, you got to frame this mustache. This is important.
just to show you even more about that. And to be honest, that wasn't even him. People wanted his mustache, so he was like, by all means. And just to show you the other type of guy that he is, Mr. Cliff Newman, who I've got a SOG thing up there honoring the first Halo with him and Mr. Melvin Hill. Mr. Walt asked him when he finally passed away, would you bring my ashes to brag? But there's one stipulation. You've got a halo in to the compound. So Mr. Cliff is not in Delta, but they've jumped hundreds of times together. So he got the all clear, and he ends up haloing into the Delta compound with the mustache and with the ashes, and they immediately de-parachute, go in and put it on the wall and put his ashes next to the mustache, and it's never been touched again.
My God, dude.
That's the respect.
The history, the respect, and the camaraderie.
And he was a practicing a Catholic, and they had a wake, and his last thing he did, I think he left $250 or $300 or something, and he said, after for the wake, he's like, if you come in crying or sad, you're not allowed in here, and everyone drinks for free on me. And he literally, his last thing was buying everyone that showed up for the wake and funeral, get them plastered to bury him. Dude, that's the kind of guy Mr. Walt was.
What kind of combat stories might you have to share about Mr. Shumate?
Well, back to the Hatchet Force issue, they were inserted in sadly, a lot of, again, the hatchet forces didn't get near the recognition unless something terrible happened. But I believe they were inserting somewhere on the tri-border area that would very well may have been Laos and not Cambodia, but they had inserted, and he had a guy that followed him around, and it was hilarious. It was like a little puppy. And next thing you know, the guy that follows Mr. Walt around isn't around, and he's looking for him, and all of a sudden he says, I forgot what they called Walt, his nickname was, but they said something's happening, and they end up coming across, it looks like, advisors leading an NVA squad through somewhere. And they immediately, since it's the hatchet force, they get all the guns, they line up, and they wreak havoc. And they were able to get the entire group that they needed down. The other group fled. They had enough time to go check it out. Walt Shumate actually took out was it not North Korean? It was either a Cuban advisor or a Chinese advisor leading a squad trying to. He said they think they were, because there was a recon team about 10 clicks in the other direction, and he thinks they had zeroed in on their radio and were going to hunt or kill them.
Wow.
So he had a way of happening up in some just amazing circumstances, and he was a solid warrior. I mean, everybody I've spoke to, and Project Delta, he was also a team leader. So wow. I mean, the experience the man had just is unquantifiable. It's just unbelievable.
And I'm happy that, you know, we can do our piece here to just make sure that that legacy lives on, and people who did not know the name Walter Shumate now know the name, and they can go learn more. I'm stoked.
And I'm trying. He's a new one I'm trying to get in contact with, but his son is I thought he was a colonel. I think he is a colonel, a Green Beret also. Wow. And I'm trying to get in touch with his son to see if he'd be willing to talk and share a little bit about his dad. But with him active duty still, it's a little tough. So 100%. I might have to wait a bit until he hangs up the gun, so to speak.
100%. I totally get it. So we've discussed Mr. Shumate, and now, last but not least, number 5 on our top 5 list. This one I'm excited to hear what you have to say. Major General Eldon Arthur Bargewell. Talk to me about Bargewell.
Mr. Eldon, as everyone, I'm sure that every clip you've ever heard is, I mean, the pivotal recon man. I mean, born in August 13th, 1947. He was he passed away sadly here in Eufaula of a terrible accident, April 29th of 2019. And God, that was just a terrible day. But he's from Hoquiam, Washington, and I'll get some information to y'all. They're about to do a new memorial and put up a statue of him, recognizing his dedication to our country. So, which is great. It's a great statue. I've seen some of the filming of the photos and such. But excuse me. Mr. Eldon immediately, he entered service in 1967, and he immediately he wanted to go SF right off the bat. That he was not doing anything else. So he passed the Q course after joining in 1967, passed it in 1968, and as far as I can tell, he was immediately. I don't even know if he had to request or not, but he was immediately sent to CCN. And at that time, I believe he was still, I think he was still a Spec 4, and he had hooked up with RT Viper. And I'm blanking on who the 1-0 of RT Viper was at that time, but he quickly, let's just say this, he quickly showed how good he was in the woods and surpassed the 1-0 that they had. And from that point on, after his first team, as far as I can tell, he was never again anything lower than a team leader. So another really neat, interesting thing. He went to officer candidate school in 73 after SOG and everything, but he actually went to Troy University, which is my alma mater, to get his degree.
Wow.
Which I was really, really cool to find that out. But he yet again, the Rangers come into play here with talking about the SOG transition into Delta, because he was at Fort Lewis with Pete Shoemaker, who, if I'm not mistaken, ended up joining him in Delta, and they were at Fort Lewis, and he was leading a rifle platoon, and I don't know how long he stayed. They had a lot of SOG vets at that time, and I don't know what he ended up getting reassigned, and I don't think he liked being reassigned. He got promoted to a captain, and when he got assigned to that rifle company in the 47th Infantry, pretty much right after that, he dropped his packet for Delta. So I'm thinking he wasn't wanting to be in a conventional unit. He was wanting to get back into the soft side of the house. So he volunteered, and I think I don't have what class he was. He was one of the early, I think he was 3 or 4. I'll verify that, but he was one of the early ones, because in 81 he volunteered. So it's probably 4 or 5, but he was initially assigned as an operations officer, and he quickly got assigned to an A squadron. At this time, A squadron. That's funny because he was in A squadron. There were only two squadrons at this time, and primarily he was in B squadron. And B squadron, they've changed it now. I wouldn't dare even talk about it. They were assault, an assault element, but he quickly became the troop commander, and then the overall squadron commander for A and B. So he worked his way up in Delta, just like he did in MACV-SOG, way up.
Wow.
And he was actually he worked his way up to, after that, deputy commander, and then was the overall unit commander from 96 to 98. So, and he was actually active in all of he was in Acid Gambit. He invaded Panama for Kurt Muse. I don't know. Yes, he was with A Squadron. He commanded A Squadron in Desert Storm, and I believe that's the last. And then he ended up going over to commanding Special Operations Command Europe as a general. That's when he was promoted to the general staff as a 2-star.
Didn't you may be able to know, was he involved with was he at all involved with what Jocko was doing in Iraq? Because I remember Jocko saying, I think Jocko said that he worked under Bargewell maybe at one point. Am I completely dropping the ball on that one?
No, I remember him mentioning something when Tilt or somebody was on.
Yeah, right. That's what I'm thinking of.
You know what it was? He served, his commander was under Eldon, and he was saying he'd always get feedback, and Jocko would say, "What'd the old man have to say today?" and all that. So Jocko was even getting info and tidbits and help from Eldon. Even then,
this is a guy who was active and contributing on into Iraq, and the community really is tight knit and small, and everybody knows each other, it seems.
To show you how small knit it is, here's Eldon, 2-star commander of. Yeah, he was already the SOCOM commander. He wasn't in Delta at this time. No, he was at Delta. He was the 1-star at Delta.
Mm-hmm.
He went over to visit Mr. John Stryker Meyer's injured son, Evan, who was in an IED blast and came by to visit his he didn't even tell John until Evan messaged him and took a picture with him, to came and check on him, and said, "I've served with your father, and I just wanted to make sure you were okay," and all that.
That's
from a
incredible.
general.
That's incredible.
That's the kind of man Eldon Bargewell was.
So walk us through some of the things Bargewell did when he was at SOG. Give us some combat stories of what Bargewell was doing in SOG. I know you got them. I can see them right here.
Yeah. Well, there are so many. I picked out one of the two good ones that I know of, and I'm sure I can recite another one that were good. But the one I've got us here was his DSC. That I've actually got a great photo of that, and it's a hair-raising tale. He was I don't know. George Cottrell, I'm in contact with him, and he can't exactly remember what happened, but RT Kansas had just been rebuilt because they had been wiped out, and they needed somebody to come along. And of course, Mr. Eldon, always up for a challenge or a fight. He was with Sidewinder, the 1-0 at that time. He joins in, gets his sawed-off RPD, and wow, he did. He brought John Paul Castagna, and even brought Robert Cook. I'm sorry about that. That's Nick Brockhausen's best buddy. But they were going to look and ended up getting down to where they were going to land, and they immediately see a massive NVA, 50, 60, something like that, just literally in the open. And Mr. Eldon is still in the chopper by this time, and he's just letting it ride with that RPD.
And he carried a sawed-off RPD, right? He carried a sawed-off RPD with a 100-round drum.
Oh, yeah. And he had the drum and then 2 extra, maybe even 3 in converted mine cases or mine pouches.
Like the Claymore bag carrying pouches, they would modify for those. Yeah.
Exactly.
Badass.
There's a great new photo they found of that one.
Wow.
But they end up getting there, and something goes wrong, and they immediately have to call a prairie fire, because if I'm not mistaken, someone gets lost that's on the team, and they're scrambling fighters because the NVA by this time is already masked they see that all of that group has been wiped out, and it had to be a SOG team up there. I missed all that. Cottrell, they've got basically, if they finally get on the ground, and the trackers, which by 70 and 71 were an absolute nightmare. I mean, they knew everything and would find them immediately. They start getting tracked. They're dumping some CS gas and some pepper and all that. It starts to rain, and they try and hold up for a little bit, but then all of a sudden RPGs, B-40 start coming in, and Eldon's running desperately low on ammunition, and he's mowing people down. He gets hit. I don't know if it's by RPG shrapnel or an actual gunshot, but he's very badly injured. And then Cook from Habu hits the RPG shooter, kills him instantly, not before the RPG goes off. And if I'm not mistaken, they end up coming about 100 NVA, just start rushing them. Mr. Bargewell runs out of ammo. They start getting the CAR-15s that are left. It it gets out of hand really quick. The Covey can't really locate them. It's a bad issue, and they finally end up. They see someone. They're starting to get flanked, and the weather breaking. Where did I just see? Gosh, I feel like I've messed all this up. They're trying to get E&E to cam duck to where their last bit of safety is, and that they finally get back for Covey. Covey starts laying in ground white phosphorus rockets, and I think Mr. Eldon literally shoots his last few rounds that he had and his last grenades as he was getting on the helicopter, and that ends up earning him. He earns the DSC and the 1-0 for the mission. Mr. Cottrell wins the Silver Star. So they basically took off from the very beginning. They were the mission. It's clearly they knew they were landing there. They were masked by 50 before they got off the helicopter. Eldon's credited, I know, with at least killing 25 to 30 of those alone.
Oh my!
And by the
God.
time they get on the ground and the trackers get up with them, there's another 150 that are now overrunning them.
Wow!
So you've got to just off those two, and then ones that weren't counted, you've got to see Mr. Eldon that 4 group of Americans were probably up against 200 or 300 NVA.
Oh my gosh! But that's just another day in SOG.
Oh, absolutely.
And especially by the 70s, early mid, it's still early, but by that's the kind of the twilight of SOG at that point, because Saigon was just such a leaky bucket at that point, and there were spies in MACV who were just immediately relaying to NVA landing sites, names of team members, so that hunter-killer teams could just be ready for them and just kill them before they could get any actionable intelligence. So what else do you know about Bargewell's time in SOG?
There are... He was trained several times. He was supposed to be on a Halo mission, and he actually learned and did quite a few jumps with Billy Waugh that were historic. And I wish I could get Mr. Billy Waugh to come on and talk about training Mr. Eldon on Halo work, but he was always, even Mr. Dick Thompson had Eldon as his 1-1, and there was, even if he was your underling, there was no one better in the field than Eldon Bargewell. It's an understatement to say that he's a hero and an absolute SOG legend. It's the amount of people he's faced in onslaught, such as the one that got him his DSC, him being shot in the chest when they're clearing. He actually ran a mission with Mad Dog Shriver. I don't know if many people are familiar with this, if you'd like me to share that story.
Please.
Well, Jerry was leading a Hatchet Force platoon that was in the CCN AO, and that night they got a call and they needed help, and Mr. Eldon, and I don't know if it was his full team, but they inserted and they start clearing house. And other than Operation Tailwind, the information and enemy activity plans, weapons were the most intel gathered during the Vietnam War, other than Operation Tailwind. If I'm not mistaken, it took 7 helicopters to get out all of the information that Eldon and Jerry Shriver got out of that NVA base camp that day.
Was that when, and I don't think it was, because I think Jerry Shriver met his unfortunate end on a Hatchet Force raid on Cosvin, when they were trying to take out the headquarters of North Vietnamese forces in Cambodia, if I remember, or is it Laos? Cambodia?
Correct. Cambodia.
God, I'm always worried putting my neck out here with this stuff. but I'm glad I'm right. But so was this just like a massive bunker complex that Jerry Shriver and Eldon Bargewell were taking a hatchet force in on, or was it actually Cosvin? What was it?
It could have been a area close to Cosvin. This could have been what led them to develop the mission for the Cosvin raid. I'm not exactly sure. And in my opinion, that the Cosvin raid, that was it probably could have been handled a little bit better. They stuff got quickly out of hand on that raid, and it's a shame how that one ended up. But as far as I know, I think that may have been in Cambodia. And I don't want to put my neck out, but I'd be willing to bet that information they got led Jerry to end up taking that mission, because it was, like I said, the largest haul at that time, and still might be, of information gathered during the war.
So to just kind of recap Bargewell's service in Vietnam with MACV-SOG, he was rubbing shoulders with guys like Dick Thompson and the infamous Mad Dog Jerry Shriver.
Billy Wall also, can't forget him.
Copy that.
He would have been on one of those infamous Halo missions, and it got scrubbed due to weather or something. So it's kind of lucky he didn't, because God, those Halo missions were so treacherous back then. But he had good training. He probably would have been fine, but he was all set to do the airborne insert. In fact, I've got some of the roster sheets for their jump training at Camp Longton.
Wow. So walk me through when Bargewell became involved with Delta.
He, after getting his commission, he ended up going, like I said, to that rifle first he went to the Ranger detachment or Ranger battalion. And after that, he did not, I feel, I don't want to speak out of turn, but I don't think he wanted to lead a rifle squad, and he immediately volunteered. And from then on, he was really, I mean, pivotal in all of it. I mean, where was he?
Did Beckwith reach out to him as well, like he did Meadows?
I'm not sure of on that, but considering one of his friends, and I'm blanking on the name, was in Delta at the time already. I'm thinking that through the grapevine, and Meadows had the final say. People don't want to say that, but in essence, Beckwith had the final say who was in Delta or not at that point in time. So I feel pretty sure through the grapevine that he was reached out to, and especially, like I said, with Delta in their record looking and seeing who's who and who should be in, that's a name that would immediately jump out off the record books.
Copy that. So he got involved, put in his paperwork, went through OTC, was selected. What kind of information do you know about his Bargewell's involvement with Delta and the kind of things he was involved in, the kind of things he did?
Well, from what I can gather, at least his first his initial years in there, when he was actually before he became squadron commander and all of that, he was operational in B squadron. He was actually with Mr. Mike Vining in B squadron. In A squadron, I think. So he was operationally, he was in both of them, and I'm pretty sure commanded both of them. And he, along with was Kirby Smith there at that time? That's another Delta name. But he went through selection, and he was basically to put it in crew terms, the 1-0 of A squadron. Anything that was planned or involving was going through him. He was getting guys off to schools to get training. He was really doing it all. I mean,
wow.
I'm trying to see what.
Just seems like an absolute natural leader.
He was with. No, he wasn't on the crashed helicopter. Actually, I think he was when on the helicopter that got Kurt Musoff, and they had to actually stay kind of seek cover in the city until someone armored personnel carrier ended up coming by and picking all of them up.
When was this?
For the Kurt Muse raid in Panama.
Oh, I understand now. Okay.
Yeah, and for when he was, the A Squadron commander for Desert Storm, he was because they had the scud hunting and all that, but he was doing. They had devoted something. Gosh, and of course I'm missing what Mr. Mike told me. They were basically not only looking for revolutionary scuds, but they were making sure the Revolutionary Guard Corps were shut down. Yet another Swiss Army knife. He could do it all. I mean, wow. He was and really once you get into commanding a squadron and all that, you're not really so much boots on the ground. You're boots on the ground, but you're not really kicking in doors and getting with it, so to speak.
Copy that.
After his initial mission, probably into Panama and what was the other one? Acid Game it is Panama, but the other one, I imagine he was like for Desert Storm put in a leadership capacity for the squadron.
Well, eventually he became a 2-star.
And
obviously promoted beyond commanding A squadron in the unit. Do you know exactly or just kind of the time period when Bargewell ceased primarily functioning with the unit?
As far as I can tell, in 98, he had officially stepped away from the unit. I believe full time. I believe in 98 because that's when he got his promotion and all of that to special operations command in Europe. He was in Sarajevo during that period doing. Wow. I've yet to find out what he was doing there, but I imagine it was some secret squirrel stuff.
We have gone through our 5 folks, and there's more, of course. I mean, we could do this forever. Again, with the information that we have access to, that you have access to, Bud, because I really want to just honor the fact that, dude, this is your research and you have been carrying this conversation. I really appreciate it. I feel like you could talk and I could listen forever about this subject. But, we've gone through our 5 here, and to begin to close us off here for our 2-part series on MACV-SOG and how its veterans helped build Delta Force and how the two are really, intrinsically tied together. I would just say we've seen a lot of similarities amongst these 5 men. I'm going to throw some out here, and I want to hear your input. I'm seeing initiative. Every single one of these guys showing incredible initiative to learn, to perform, and to seek out incredible things. Serving with the SAS. The fact that they all were in MACV-SOG. Something that, nobody forced you to be in. You had to sign on the dotted line and volunteer for that. And then whilst in those capacities, continuing to push the ball forward to be the best they can be. And I mean, we see guys like Mr. Bargewell ending up a 2-star general in command of a huge portion of the defensive capability in Europe. And it just goes for me to show that our argument here that we're making is real solid. Delta Force could not have come around without MACV-SOG and the guys who came out of MACV-SOG. What are your thoughts on that?
I would add another word in there, although it might not be the best, but to some extent, that all of these men were fearless.
Oh wow!
One story I'll add in for the last bit from Mr. Eldon. He was very good friends with a man named Rick. I've got my Marine's name on my mind. Mr. Dave Maurer, who is an accomplished 1-0 of RT Hawaii, and they were loading up and had known each other forever, 2 1-0s. They wanted to go out on a mission together, and that usually is against the rules, but they got the okay. They're loading up, going out. They lay their backpacks down on the launch site, and it's loaded with toe poppers and claymores and the whole Magilla. And they're sitting over there. Dave's smoking a cigarette, getting ready. And luckily, they've just stepped off, and a truck comes by, and a 3/4 ton hits Dave's backpack, the backpack, and blows up everything. The truck's destroyed. Dave's riddled with shrapnel. Mr. Eldon's riddled with shrapnel. Two yards end up dying, and he was put out of commission for quite some time with that. And it just shows you, I mean, you've got to be fearless, and you've got to have your head on your shoulders when you're dealing with these two units.
I'm always going to contend that MACV-SOG, the history of SOG, is getting an incredible amount of attention, and thankfully so, because our modern warfighting capabilities were forged in Vietnam. Vietnam was the anvil that created the security, safety, and defensive capabilities that we now enjoy, that are provided by the Tier 1 operators of units such as Delta Force. And once we got together, Bud, and we started talking and just kind of thinking about what kind of project we could do, it just felt so natural that this is what we would talk about for our collaboration. Tying off the podcast here, I just want to say thank you, sir. You rose to the challenge. The people out there, you guys will never know, the amount of times we talked on the phone, Zoom calls, getting ready, and just the amount of work that you put in. And I've watched here during this time together as we've been making this brief 2-part series, you just making sure you're getting it right, and completely stating when you don't know. And that humility and that integrity is what these veterans deserve and what this history deserves. And I'm just so happy that you made the time to come on today.
That's a perfect point. I want to thank you for taking a chance and having me on today. And you're right. This, as far as I've seen, no one has yet to cover anything like this. And like you said, there's so much more. I've got a whole list here of guys that can be covered, but I thank y'all for bearing with me. And, like you said, if I didn't know it, I try and say I don't know it. And, if by all means, if I've messed up, y'all have my Instagram and all that, and correct me by all means. My whole mission is to help guys like Andy here with their search and history, although he's doing a hell of a job himself. And really give the dedication and the honor to these men that they should have deserved the day they came home instead of being spit on, called baby killers, and all of that, like my father was, and some of these SOG veterans were, you know. So it's about time that someone, thank God, someone like you's out here giving these men the credit and the recognition they deserve for the sacrifices they laid for this country.
And absolutely the same to you, sir. And we live now, thankfully, in a country that's much more appreciative of what our warfighters are doing. But you know, these guys in the unit, they go to work every day, they train every day, and they are the absolute silent professionals. We don't know anything about them. We don't need to. There are not TV cameras following men through OTC. These guys are the real deal, and their contribution to our security is immense, more than we will ever know, and that's the historian's bane. That is the work that hopefully we're doing today, trying to just bring some of these stories out there, trying to just preserve, in a sense, names like Shumate, names like Bargewell, names like Meadows, all the guys we talked about today. These are legends, and we want their legend to live on. They deserve it. What they have done for us, what they have done for our military, deserves that. And Bud, again, one last time, thanks for your time today, sir. I look forward to having you back, because there's some things I want to talk with you about and get your input on even more.
Anytime you want me, just drop me a line, and I'm free, and I'm here to help, man.
Copy that. Everybody, this has been the Modern Military History Podcast, part 2 of 2, SOG to Delta, with Mr. Bud Gibson. Everybody take care, and we'll see you on the next one. Happy 2023.